Emily Wilson stood by the window, gazing at the skyline of New York City. The view from her small apartment on the outskirts of Manhattan wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was hers. She had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, cleaning office buildings and managing to provide for her son, Ethan. At 32, Emily had learned that life wasn't about the luxury you could afford, but about the sacrifices you were willing to make for the ones you loved. Her apartment was modest. The walls, though thin, held memories of quiet evenings spent with Ethan, and the worn-out furniture echoed the countless hours she spent working. Her life wasn't easy. Her husband, James, had passed away suddenly in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving her alone with a son to raise in a city where dreams were as easily shattered as they were made. Still, Emily kept going, driven by the one thing that kept her going, Ethan. He was the reason she woke up every morning, the reason she fought through the exhaustion that often weighed her down. As she bent over to tie her sneakers, Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, when are you coming back?" His small, innocent question always made her pause. Emily smiled, brushing the thought aside. "Not long, sweetie. Mommy's going to work, but I'll be back before you know it." Ethan's face lit up, his big eyes filled with trust. It was all the motivation Emily needed. She kissed him on the forehead, grabbed her cleaning supplies, and left for another long day in one of the city's most high-end office buildings. The skyscraper she worked in was a towering beacon of wealth and success. The polished floors, the sleek glass walls, and the impeccably dressed people who walked through it all seemed so far removed from her reality. As she made her way through the lobby with her cart of cleaning supplies, Emily couldn't help but feel like an invisible part of the building's machinery, doing the necessary work that no one cared to acknowledge. Her daily routine consisted of scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans, and ensuring that every office sparkled. To the people who worked here, she was just another face, another employee who existed in the background. And Emily had long accepted that. Her life had become about surviving, not thriving. However, today something felt different. As she was wiping down a conference room table, a man entered the room. He was tall, sharply dressed in a suit that seemed a size too perfect for anyone else. He walked with confidence, his every movement exuding authority. Emily quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own appearance, wearing a faded uniform and tired shoes. She had seen him before, of course. He was Michael Carter, the CEO of the company that owned the building. His name was known in the business world, and his reputation as a successful, driven businessman was something Emily couldn't help but notice. She had never spoken to him, but his presence was undeniably commanding. As Michael walked past her, he glanced in her direction. Emily froze for a moment, her cleaning cloth in hand. He nodded slightly, a gesture she didn't expect. She quickly averted her eyes, trying to focus on the task at hand, but the encounter left her slightly rattled. That afternoon, Michael walked through the lobby again, this time stopping near the elevator. He spotted Emily once more, her head down, diligently scrubbing away at the floor. He took a moment to observe her. There was something about her, her work ethic, her quiet dedication, that piqued his curiosity. In all the years he had spent at the top of the business world, he had rarely encountered anyone who worked as tirelessly and unpretentiously as she did. Curious, he approached her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth yet authoritative, but there was a hint of something softer in it. "You do a great job here. I've noticed you around." Emily looked up, surprised. "Oh, thank you, sir. I just try to get the work done, that's all." Michael nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "You do more than just get it done. You make this place look better than it deserves." Emily chuckled nervously, her face reddening. "It's just part of the job. I'm sure the office workers don't really notice." "They should," Michael said. "You're an essential part of keeping things running here." The compliment, although simple, made Emily feel seen. She had never thought about her work in that way. To her, it was just what she had to do to survive. But here was someone who was willing to recognize her effort. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, unsure of how to respond to someone who lived in a world so far removed from hers. Michael smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm Michael, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Emily," she replied, shaking his hand awkwardly. He held onto her hand just a moment longer than necessary, and for that brief moment, Emily felt a connection that was both unexpected and unsettling. It was just a handshake, but there was something about it that lingered in her mind long after he had walked away. The following weeks were filled with more of the same. Emily worked diligently, and Michael continued to pop in and out of the building for meetings. But now, there was something different between them. Whenever they crossed paths, Michael would offer a nod or a brief word of acknowledgement, and Emily would respond, albeit nervously. She never expected to be noticed by someone like him. Michael was the kind of man who could have anyone, and yet here he was, acknowledging her. She began to question why. Was it genuine? Was he simply being polite? Or was there something more? It wasn't until one day, a few weeks later, that Michael approached her again. This time, it was not just a casual greeting.
Émilie, quand il talk to you for a minute?
Michael asked, his voice slightly more serious than usual. Of course, Mr. Carter, Emily said, her heart skipping a beat as she followed him to a quiet corner of the office. I've been thinking about this for a while, Michael began. You've been doing exceptional work here, and I wanted to offer you something more. I could use someone like you in my office, someone who can take on a bit more responsibility. You'd have a higher position, better pay, and more opportunities. Emily was stunned. She had never imagined she'd be offered such a thing, not in a million years. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. But there was a catch, of course. Why me? Emily asked, her voice cautious. Why offer this to someone like me? Michael looked at her, his expression softer now. Because I see something in you. You're dedicated, hardworking, and honest. Those are the qualities I admire. You deserve more than just cleaning the office. You deserve a chance to prove what you can do.
Émilie felt a rush of emotion, excitement, fear, confusion.
Could she really take a job like this? It would mean a significant change in her life, but it also felt like a chance to break free from the struggles she had known for so long. I don't know, Mr. Carter, Emily said, hesitating. I have a son, and I don't want to take a job that could take me away from him. I need to think about it. Michael nodded, his expression understanding.
I get it, Émilie. Take your time.
But know that the offer stands, whenever you're ready. As the days passed, Emily found herself torn between the opportunity Michael had given her and the life she had worked so hard to maintain. She had always been independent, always fought for herself and her son. But this offer, this chance to work alongside someone like Michael, was something she couldn't ignore. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything, for her, and for Ethan. But she knew deep down, that she couldn't make this decision lightly. If she accepted the job, it would mean leaving behind the simple life she had fought for. It would mean facing a future full of uncertainties, but also full of possibilities. Emily stood in the quiet of her apartment, the hum of the city outside barely breaking her concentration. Ethan was already asleep, his small form curled up in bed. She walked over to the window, staring out at the city lights that glittered in the distance. New York City, with all its chaos and beauty, had always been a place where she felt both at home and invisible. A place where dreams were made, and dreams were also shattered. And now, in the midst of it all, she had an unexpected choice to make. The offer from Michael Carter lingered in her mind, swirling in her thoughts like an echo she couldn't shake. She had been offered a promotion, a chance to leave behind the work she had known for so long and take on something more meaningful, and yes, more financially rewarding. But it also meant stepping into a world far beyond her reach. A world where people like Michael Carter operated, wealthy, powerful, confident. She could already imagine the questions, the expectations that would come with such a move. Would she be able to handle it? Could she balance this new responsibility with her role as Ethan's mother? The possibility of greater financial stability for Ethan, of course, was tempting, but what if it meant sacrificing time with him? What if it meant losing the simplicity and peace they had now? Emily had always prided herself on being self-reliant. She had built her life from the ground up after James's death, and every decision she had made had been for Ethan. He was her anchor, her purpose. Every choice she made was centered around giving him a better life than the one she had had growing up. But now she was faced with a crossroads, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure which path to take. Michael had continued to reach out over the past few weeks, always with the same offer, a better position, more responsibility, more pay. But each time, Emily hesitated. The more he offered, the more she pulled back. She couldn't help but wonder if Michael was offering her these opportunities out of genuine admiration or if it was something else entirely. Was he trying to fix the loneliness that both of them seemed to carry, Or was this simply another business move for him? He had been kind and thoughtful, but there was still a part of Emily that felt uneasy. He was a man who had everything: wealth, status, and a son of his own, Lucas. Yet, despite all his success, Michael was still a man searching for something deeper, something more meaningful. She had seen it in his eyes when he talked about his wife, whom he had lost years ago, and the emptiness that lingered after her death. Emily didn't want to become a part of that void. She didn't want to be the one to fill the gaps in his life, only to be left behind once he no longer needed her.
One afternoon, Michael called again.
His voice, though calm, held a trace of urgency. "Emily," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about you lately. I understand your hesitation, but I need you to understand something. I'm not just offering you this job for me. I'm offering it because I believe you have something that this company needs. You have something that many people here don't." Emily's grip tightened around the phone. His words were soft, but they held weight. He had seen something in her that no one else had, something worth taking a chance on. "I'm not looking for anything more than a chance, Emily.
A real opportunity.
I know you have dreams. And this could be your chance to make them a reality." Emily paused. She could hear Ethan's soft breathing from the other room, a reminder of what was at stake. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The world she was about to step into was not one she could easily walk away from if things went wrong. The days that followed were filled with more indecision. Emily spent her evenings pacing back and forth in her small apartment, the offer from Michael constantly playing in her mind. She was tired, physically and emotionally, but the thought of providing a better future for Ethan kept her from sleeping. Could this job really change their lives? Would it be worth the risks? As much as she wanted to deny it, the allure of something more, something better, was hard to ignore. But that didn't mean she was ready to dive into a new life, especially one so unfamiliar. What if she failed? What if the world Michael lived in wasn't meant for her? And what about Ethan? He was still so young, so dependent on her. The thought of being away from him for long hours at a time filled her with dread. She couldn't help but remember her late husband, James. He had always pushed her to dream bigger, to aim higher. Yet, after his death, Emily had come to terms with a simpler life. She had embraced the role of mother, worker, protector, and provider. But now, with Michael's offer looming over her, she realized that maybe James had been right. Maybe she was selling herself short. Maybe she could do more, be more, for both herself and Ethan. But as Emily wrestled with her thoughts, she was faced with another reality, the fear of change. Was she willing to leave behind the life she had fought so hard to build? Was it worth it to take a risk, or was she just looking for a way to escape the mundane? The decision came on an ordinary afternoon, one that began like any other. Emily was at work, scrubbing the floors in the lobby of the building, when Michael appeared again. This time, he wasn't just passing through. He had come to find her.
Émilie, can we talk?
His voice was softer than usual, tinged with something that sounded like genuine concern. She nodded, leading him to a quiet corner of the lobby. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. Michael hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I want to give you some time to think, but I also want you to know that I'm not just asking you to take a job. I'm asking you to trust me." Emily looked at him, searching his eyes. Was this a man she could trust? Or was he simply offering her a way into his world, one that she might never truly fit into? "You're asking me to change my life," she said, her voice steady but uncertain. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can just walk away from everything I've built." Michael stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You're not walking away from anything, Emily.
You're rebuilding something better. For you, for Ethan."
"I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to take a step forward, to reach for something more." Emily felt the weight of his words. Was this the opportunity she had been waiting for? Or was it another temptation that would lead her into a life she wasn't prepared for? Later that evening, after putting Ethan to bed, Emily sat in the dim light of her living room. The decision was clear now. It wasn't about Michael, or the job, or the money. It was about the future she wanted for Ethan, the life she wanted to give him. She couldn't afford to live in fear anymore. She had to take the leap. The next morning, Emily called Michael. Her voice was steady, but her heart raced as she spoke. "I'm in," she said. "I'll take the job." The silence on the other end was followed by a quiet but genuine smile in Michael's voice. "You won't regret it, Emily." And with that, a new chapter of Emily's life began. Emily walked into the gleaming office building for the first time as Michael's new personal assistant. The polished marble floors, the quiet hum of high-end technology, and the sense of quiet power that radiated from every corner felt like an entirely new world. It was one she had never imagined being a part of. The once intimidating lobby was now a place where she walked with purpose, as if she belonged. Her new office was small but well-appointed. It was worlds away from her cramped apartment, yet it felt like she was still adjusting to the idea that this was her reality now. She could feel the weight of the opportunity she had taken on, knowing that it was a risk, but it was a risk she had to take for Ethan's future. She spent her first few weeks getting acquainted with the team, adjusting to the fast-paced environment, and navigating the complex dynamics of the corporate world. It wasn't easy, but Emily threw herself into the work with the same determination she had always applied to everything in her life. Michael's presence in the office was commanding, yet he remained surprisingly distant. Though they worked together daily, there was a formal boundary that neither of them crossed.
Émilie understood.
Michael was her boss, and their interactions had to remain professional. Still, there were moments when she caught him looking at her in a way that made her heart race. There was an intensity to his gaze that was impossible to ignore. As weeks passed, Emily began to feel the pressure of her new role. The workload was heavier than anything she had ever imagined, and there were moments when she doubted her ability to keep up. She worked late into the night, often leaving the office long after the building had emptied. But Michael always made sure to check in. "Everything all right, Emily?" he would ask casually, his voice soft, almost like he was worried. She smiled, brushing off his concern.
"Yes, just getting used to everything."
"It's a lot, but I'm managing." Michael would nod, always encouraging but never pushy. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask."
Remember, you're not alone in this.
His words comforted her, though Emily often found herself questioning the unspoken tension between them. Michael was an enigmatic figure, brilliant yet detached, his emotions always just out of reach. But he was also kind, not the type of boss who simply demanded results, but one who took the time to understand the people around him. As Emily worked alongside him, she began to learn more about the man behind the facade of power. Michael had a son, Lucas, whom he spoke about rarely. It was clear that his past was marked by loss, the loss of his wife, the woman who had once been the center of his world. One day, Emily asked him about her. What was she like? Emily had asked, genuinely curious but also trying to understand the quiet sadness that sometimes clouded his eyes. Michael paused, his usual calm demeanor faltering for just a moment. She was everything. A force of nature, really. It's hard to explain. We had our problems, but I thought we'd grow old together. Losing her was harder than I thought it would be. Emily saw the weight of his grief then, and for the first time, she felt an odd connection to him. It was strange. This man who had everything was still haunted by the same emptiness she had lived with for years. His pain was different from hers, but it was still pain. "I'm sorry," she had said quietly. He had given her a brief smile. "I don't like talking about it. But thanks, Emily. It helps in a way." As the weeks continued to pass, Emily found herself increasingly drawn to Michael, not just because of his kindness but because of the complexity he carried. He was a man who had everything, wealth, power, success, but he still seemed like someone who was searching for something more. The lines between professionalism and personal feelings were starting to blur. Emily had promised herself that she would keep things strictly business. But it wasn't easy. Every time they worked late together, every time their conversations lingered longer than necessary, Emily felt the weight of her growing attraction to him. One evening, as they were both leaving the office after a long day, Michael stopped her just as she was about to step into the elevator. "Emily, could I ask you something?" he said, his voice low. "Of course," she replied, her heart inexplicably racing. "I know you've been working hard," he said, his eyes searching hers. "But how are you really doing? This job, it's a lot, and I want to make sure it's not taking too much of a toll on you." Emily swallowed. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, and for a moment, it felt like the world around them had disappeared. "I'm doing fine," she said quickly, trying to sound confident. "I'm just getting used to the pace." Michael didn't look convinced, but he didn't push her. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know you're strong, Emily. But sometimes, even the strongest people need someone to lean on. Her breath caught in her throat. There was an undeniable sincerity in his words, but Emily had always been fiercely independent. She couldn't let herself become someone's charity case, even if the person offering seemed like he genuinely cared. I'm okay, she repeated, forcing a smile. Thanks, Michael. He seemed to accept her response but didn't move. For a brief moment, Emily thought he might say something else, something more personal, something that would break the professional wall they had built. But instead, he simply nodded and stepped back, allowing her to enter the elevator. As the doors closed, Emily exhaled deeply, her heart still pounding. What was happening between them? She was beginning to question her own feelings, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't afford to get involved. Not now, not with everything she had to lose. Back in his own office, Michael sat at his desk, staring out the window into the city. His mind raced. Emily's presence had become a constant in his life, a small unspoken influence that he couldn't ignore. He had tried to keep things professional, but he found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. She was different. She wasn't like the women he had dated in the past, the ones who only saw him for his status or his wealth. Emily was real, grounded. She didn't need him, and that was what intrigued him the most. She had her own life, her own strength, and yet, she had allowed herself to trust him, just a little. But Michael knew that he couldn't cross that line. He was her boss, and no matter how much he admired her, he had to keep things professional. He couldn't let his feelings for her complicate everything. But as the days wore on, that line seemed to blur more and more. Michael couldn't deny that he was falling for her. The more time they spent together, the more he realized that it wasn't just about respect or admiration anymore. He wanted her, not just as an assistant, not just as a colleague, but as something more. The problem was, he didn't know if she felt the same way. As the weeks passed, the connection between Emily and Michael continued to deepen, despite both of them trying to keep their professional boundaries intact. Every time they worked late together, shared a quiet conversation, or exchanged a look, the unspoken bond between them grew stronger. Emily couldn't deny it any longer. She was drawn to him. She could feel the weight of his presence, and every time he spoke to her, her heart raced. But Emily was still cautious. She had her son, Ethan, to consider. She couldn't afford to make any impulsive decisions. The last thing she needed was a complicated romance that could turn her life upside down. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to push her feelings aside, the chemistry between them was undeniable. Michael was everything she had never thought she wanted: powerful, confident, and yet vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Emily found herself lingering in the hallway outside Michael's office. She had just finished another set of tasks, but there was something about the silence of the building, the quiet hum of the late-night city, that made her hesitate. Michael's office door was slightly ajar, and she could hear him speaking softly on the phone. I just need a little more time on this, he was saying.
Il figure it out.
You don't need to worry about it. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that hinted at stress. Emily stood there for a moment, unsure whether to interrupt. But something inside her told her that this wasn't just about work. It was about him, Michael Carter, the man who had become more than just her boss. It was about the small moments they shared, the unexpected kindness he showed, and the vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. She knocked gently on the door.
Michael? She called softly, stepping inside.
Is everything okay? Michael looked up, startled for a second before he relaxed at the sight of her. Emily, I didn't realize you were still here.
Everything is fine.
Just some work stuff, nothing to worry about. But Emily saw through his calm exterior. He might be the CEO of a major company, but in that moment, he looked like any other man dealing with the weight of his own responsibilities. You don't have to pretend with me, Emily said quietly, walking into the room. I can see that something's bothering you. Want to talk about it? Michael hesitated, then sighed, pushing his chair back slightly. It's just a lot going on. I'm juggling so many things, and sometimes I feel like I'm losing control. I can't seem to get everything right. Emily felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen that same kind of struggle before, the kind where everything seemed to be slipping away, and the person felt alone in their fight. Without thinking, she walked over and sat down in the chair next to his desk.
You're not alone, Michael, she said softly.
You've been working tirelessly, but you don't have to carry everything by yourself. Sometimes, it's okay to let someone help. Michael looked at her, his expression softening. He hadn't expected her to say that. There was a part of him that wanted to open up, to let her in, but the professional wall he had built around himself had always been strong. I don't know how to let go of control, he admitted, his voice low. I've always been the one who handles everything, and I'm not used to relying on others. Emily smiled gently. It's okay to let go sometimes. It's okay to trust others. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence. Emily knew that this wasn't just about work, it was about something deeper. It was about the space they were both finding in each other's lives, and about how much they were beginning to rely on one another, even without realizing it. The following days felt different. There was a subtle shift between them, a shift that neither could ignore. They were still professional, still committed to their roles, but the invisible tension between them had become palpable. Michael was finding himself looking at Emily more, noticing the way she smiled, the way she spoke with conviction and warmth. He was no longer just seeing her as his assistant, he was seeing her as a person, as someone he could trust, someone who made him feel understood in a way he hadn't felt in years. For Emily, the feeling was mutual. She caught herself thinking about Michael more often than she cared to admit. His quiet strength, his vulnerability that he rarely showed others, and the kindness he had shown her during the hardest moments of her transition to this new job. But she also knew that getting involved with him was a risk. Her life was already complicated, and the last thing she needed was to make it more difficult by getting tangled in emotions she couldn't afford. Yet, as the days went on, she found it harder to ignore the pull between them. She started to catch herself looking for excuses to talk to him, to spend more time with him, even if it was just for a brief moment. And when their conversations shifted from work to personal topics, things became even more difficult to navigate. One late afternoon, as Emily was about to leave the office, Michael stopped her once again.
Émilie, quand il speak to you for a moment.
His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable softness to it. She nodded, stepping closer. Of course, Michael. What's up? Michael hesitated, his eyes searching hers as if he was weighing his words carefully. I've been thinking a lot about us. About this, he said, his tone tentative. I know this might complicate things, but I need to be honest with you. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She felt a surge of both anticipation and anxiety.
Michael,
I care about you, Emily, he interrupted, his voice more confident now.
I can't deny it anymore.
I've been trying to keep my feelings in check, but it's getting harder every day. You mean more to me than just a colleague. I want you to know that. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, the moment when everything between them would change. Michael. She searched for the right words, but her mind was racing. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected to feel this way about him. But now that the words were out in the open, there was no turning back. I care about you too, she said quietly. But I don't know if I can be what you need. I have a son. My life is already complicated. And I can't risk everything by getting involved with you. Michael's expression faltered, but he didn't look angry or disappointed. He looked understanding. I'm not asking for everything, Emily, he said softly. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. But I wanted you to know how I feel. Emily nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready to handle it. I'm not sure what this means for us, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. But I don't want to lose the connection we have. Whatever it is, I don't want to throw it away. Michael reached out and gently placed a hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said. We'll take it one step at a time.
Just, don't push me away.
And for the first time since taking this job, Emily didn't feel like she was standing at a crossroads. She didn't feel like she was facing a decision she couldn't make. Instead, she felt like she was beginning to understand that life didn't have to be about choosing between love and duty. Sometimes, it was about finding a balance between the two. The days following Michael's confession felt strange. There was a shift in the air around them, a subtle but undeniable change in the way they interacted. They continued their professional work, but the unspoken words hung between them like a thread waiting to snap. Michael had made it clear that he cared for Emily, and though Emily didn't fully know how to respond, she couldn't shake the feeling that things had already shifted. Emily found herself thinking about him more than she should have. She wondered if there was a future for them, something beyond the confines of their roles at the office. Could they make it work? Would it be fair to Ethan? The thought of balancing a relationship with Michael, while still being the mother Ethan needed, kept her awake at night. Despite her uncertainty, part of her wanted to believe that it could work. Michael was different from the men she had known. He was compassionate, intelligent, and despite his wealth, he seemed to understand the weight of everyday struggles. But was it enough? Was love and connection enough to overcome the practicalities of their lives? One evening, after another long day of work, Emily stood in the elevator, staring at the floor numbers as they slowly climbed. Her mind was far from the tasks she had just finished. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was changing, something beyond her control. As the elevator doors opened, Michael was standing just outside waiting. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with something more earnest, something deeper in his gaze. "Emily," he said quietly, as she stepped out. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat, but she nodded. "Of course." They walked down the hallway to a quiet conference room. Michael opened the door for her, and they both entered, the tension palpable in the air. "I've been thinking," Michael began, his voice low. "About us. About what happens next."
Emilie briscocht. Michael, I.
"Emily," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "I know what you're going to say.
You're afraid. I can see it in your eyes every time we talk.
You're scared of what might happen if we go down this road. But what if it doesn't have to be scary? What if we could figure this out together?" Emily looked at him, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had been avoiding this conversation, avoiding confronting the truth of what was happening between them. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she couldn't risk it, that she couldn't let herself fall for him, but here he was, asking her to make a choice. "I can't promise you everything, Michael," she said, her voice trembling slightly.
I can't just turn my life upside down.
"I have Ethan to think about. I've spent so long building this life for him, and I'm scared of what will happen if I let someone else in."
What if it all falls apart?
Michael's eyes softened. "I get it. I understand more than you know. But what if we don't let fear control us?"
What if, juste for once, we take the chance?
Emily swallowed hard.
I'm scared, Michael.
"You're asking me to risk everything I've worked for, everything I've built for Ethan. And I'm not sure if I can do that." For a long moment, there was silence. Michael stepped closer to her, his expression earnest and sincere. "You don't have to risk everything, Emily," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to give up your life for me. I'm asking you to trust me, trust that we can make this work. I want to be a part of your life, and I want to be a part of Ethan's life too. But I can't do it alone. I need you to decide if you're willing to take that step with me." Emily's heart raced. It felt like the world had narrowed down to just this moment, a moment that could change everything. She thought of Ethan, of the life she had built, and of her own dreams that were still locked away in a corner of her heart. Could she allow herself to believe in love again? Could she risk everything for something that felt so uncertain? "I need time," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "I can't make this decision right now." Michael nodded. "I understand.
Take the time you need, Emily.
Just know that when you're ready, I'm here." The next few days passed in a blur. Emily went through the motions of her daily life, but her mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of Michael, of the decision she had to make. She spent her evenings with Ethan, trying to focus on him, but every time she looked at her son, she was reminded of the stakes involved. She had always put him first, always done what was best for him. But now, the question was whether she could put herself first, too. The uncertainty was eating at her. The feelings she had for Michael were undeniable, but the fear of losing control, of losing her independence, was equally powerful. Emily had spent so many years fighting for everything she had, and the thought of giving up some of that control for a relationship scared her more than anything else. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, she sat alone in her living room, the soft hum of the city outside her window the only sound. She thought of Michael's words, "I'm not asking you to give up your life for me." But could she truly believe that? Could she balance both worlds without losing herself in the process? The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the seconds stretching into what felt like eternity. Finally, Emily stood up, her decision made. She knew that if she didn't take this chance, she would regret it forever. She couldn't live with the what-ifs. The next day, Emily called Michael. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she dialed his number. "Michael," she said when he answered. "I've thought about it. And I'm ready." There was a moment of silence on the other end before Michael's voice came through, soft but filled with relief. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Emily replied, her voice steady now. "I'm ready to take that step. Not just for you but for me too."
Michael let out a breath.
"You don't know how happy that makes me. We'll figure this out together, Emily. One step at a time." In the weeks that followed, Emily and Michael began to navigate their new relationship, carefully balancing their work and personal lives. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and uncertainty, but they both knew they were making something special. Emily learned to trust Michael, not just as her boss, but as someone who genuinely cared for her and her son. Michael, in turn, made it clear that he was committed to building a future with her, one where they could support each other without sacrificing their individual dreams. As Emily looked out the window one evening, watching the sunset over the skyline, she realized that life was never going to be perfect. But with Michael by her side, and Ethan at the center of it all, she felt more at peace than she had in years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Emily felt ready to face whatever came next.